I suspect, and I'm speculating here, is that he's an anti-war old lefty. He's kind of a Bernie bro who just doesn't like war, and so he doesn't like what he's seeing happening in Gaza. And he's just looking at the numbers and some of the footage, and I
think so too.
That's kind of, I would speculate, is his position on that. I think that as a consequence of that, he's invited on a lot of people to talk from that point of view. He's had other people from the other side, so it's not fair to say he's only had one view. But
I think that was more pre-October 7th, but fair enough. I mean, you can't expect... He goes where the curiosity goes and where his
but he's had
are.
other people. Coleman Hughes he had on after October 7th a couple of times.
Yeah.
But I think but there's an imbalance.
But it was only 20 minutes.
Hang on
he wasn't there for that.
But when he invited Douglas on, what was curious about that is that the previous week he'd had Dave Smith on, and I also had Daryl Cooper on. Daryl Cooper, who said in that interview, "You got to take Mein Kampf with a pinch of salt." He said in that interview, Hitler wasn't really anti-Semitic until the late 30s.
They kept it quiet,
ignoring the fact that Hitler was completely anti-Semitic in Mein Kampf. He was making speeches titled "Why I Am Anti-Semitic" as early as the 20s, or "Why We Are Anti-Semitic," I think was the... he's explicitly anti-Semitic, and it was clear all along what they wanted. So complete revisionism. But anyway, why it's relevant is that when Douglas, who's obviously extremely pro-Israel, comes on the week after Dave Smith, Joe doesn't just let Douglas on like he lets these other guys on. Yeah. And by the way, with Daryl Cooper, he gave a long preamble about how much he likes Daryl Cooper's work. But when Douglas come on, he needs to invite Dave Smith on to check everything he's saying.
And Ian Carroll, too. Ian Carroll was the other one.
Ian Carroll, that's the other one.
We were just like, whoa, there was the one for me. Because I listened to the whole Daryl Cooper one, sort of seeing what the fuss was about.
The Ian Carroll one was horrible.
Oh, my God. So with Daryl Cooper, to be fair, I kind of listened just in isolation, not really being familiar with all the other hours of podcasting and stuff, just to kind of see. And I'm like, not to make an exact comparison, but he's talking about history in this controversial way, and I can see where, I'm not as familiar with the David Irving stuff that was brought to my attention. I sort of now kind of get what he's sort of summoning in that, but I also realize Joe has listened to 30 plus hours and hours and hours of this guy, so he has a different perception than me, who's just watching for the first time. So I'm just trying to judge the conversation in isolation. So I put that in one category, and then in these splitting hairs next to that is the Ian Carroll episode back to back, and you watch Ian Carroll on Twitter. It's just no question.
Not just that. Also, in the interview, he does.
I saw the games.
The games he's playing, word games. Is I'm not saying all Jews. However, if Epstein is because Jews, this is a.
I'm not saying all Jews at all. I'm not talking about all Jews.
The Jews.
But if Epstein is that, then the Jews have to own it.
Yeah, and the other thing about these, almost all of these characters, it's a good point that Noam Dworman made and Christopher Hitchens made is why are they only talking about the Jews? Why it's this obsession that everything goes back to the Jews? And I don't think it's the worst of these aren't necessarily I actually don't think they're the worst offenders. It's the Groyper movement you're seeing of Nick Fuentes, who's explicitly and openly and wouldn't deny being anti-Semitic. And we're seeing blood libel from Candace Owens. We're seeing some pretty, I would say, heinous stuff.
Gaines
I've not heard of.
He's the. How do you describe him?
I don't know who he is.
Oh. We don't have to talk about him. He would love that.
Back to Rogan's show.
Fresh and Fit podcast. I don't know if you've seen that. Those two guys who Pat knows.
That's a fan.
He's also viciously and proudly anti-Semitic. And now he's getting, it's all of a sudden, the things you can say about Jews now in polite company and just get away with it, you're just that's the only thing I would say to Rogan. It's not like we can't have these conversations, spicy, scintillating conversations, but just think about where that Overton window has moved. You got Kanye putting on swastikas, and he'll still sell out and do what he has to do. It's kind of
So
nuts.
my problem is that I don't like those characters, but I just won't listen. I have listened to the Daryl Cooper stuff and Daryl Cooper on Tucker Carlson, so that I understand what's going on, and I remind listeners that in the Tucker Carlson interview, he said Churchill was the real villain of World War II, and that's an idea that's actually being discussed. Online, right?
The question is the threshold of engageability. At what point is this now engageable versus not?
Wait, you were going to say, though, you don't have a problem with...
I don't necessarily have a problem with... I don't believe in cancelling people or saying these people should be censored. What I think is more speech, and so Daryl Cooper should go and have a debate with Andrew Roberts, the preeminent historian on Churchill, but he's too scared to do that. Let's have Andrew Roberts on the Rogan Experience. Let's have the counter narrative on to discuss what's going on here. If they really cared about truth, why wouldn't they do that?
Because they don't. Because they also care about entertainment, and it's probably not entertaining to have a real historian talk about real history.
I don't know that's true. I've read several of Andrew Roberts' books. I think they're phenomenally good.
Okay.
And I've watched his interviews. I think he's completely compelling.
Winston, say what you want about the idea that, well, he didn't have Douglas on then the next week to have his time. At the same time, that internet event was amazing, just to actually have it happen. And in the intro of that debate, Rogan explicitly says, you know, I respect your opinion, I respect your views. I'm sure it's an exhausting topic to be like, what's the point of having 3 hours with you, 3 hours with you? Everybody kind of tries to clip it up and do this and spar at each other with clips, which is the best we can do when you're not in the room. But having the two of them in the room, was it not a net benefit to at least have that out? I think so, right? Like Rogan having the two of them there, I think is a net positive.
I think so. One thing that was interesting is that Smith and Rogan made loads of quick concessions. So, unfortunately, I forgot.
Yeah,
I don't have the details, but they.
In what sense?
In the sense.
About the anti-Semitism in the beginning. That yes, we have to be mindful of these bad actors. Those were their concerns. They kind of wanted to get past that, and I did want them to get more into the substance of Israel Gaza, which I thought was the juiciest.
Yes, agreed.
Parts. But people kind of missed, and maybe this was also strategically, mistakes that Douglas may have made. But people were missing the points by both sides. It's like, obviously, experts on subjects know more about things, and I think that should be taken into account when you hear their ideas. And it's not that they have a monopoly on truth, but they might be closer to it given their experience with it. Nobody denies that. Even Rogan's show has had tons of experts and non-experts alike, whether it's fitness or MMA or any of these subjects. So it's not like they really disagreed on that. The question is, it seemed like Douglas was saying, if you're not an expert, you're really not allowed to speak on it. And I don't.
But he didn't say that. He
exactly.
said, no, you're allowed to speak.
Correct. But I think people were his posture was signaling that. Not that he was explicitly saying that. So I think people were interpreting what he was saying as that. And I think that the whole point was, the question is, when somebody says something who's just read about a subject and somebody who's been there has never been, like a grain of salt, how big should the grain of salt be? Like when you're listening to different people, that's like the main takeaway from that conversation.
Yeah,
and they could have agreed on a lot more, I think, and it could have built more than just being this sparring match. But I still think overall, it's a net positive to have these ideas be put to the test. Like I'm much more interested now, I'm saying, in like not proving who is hateful internally, but proving what's true and what's not true. And if we believe the truth is on our side in whatever case you're making, that's the most important thing, because you can spend ad nauseum all day. To me, the real woke is trying to prove what somebody feels inside and what their intentions are inside when they're saying not. Like, make that assessment and just see where their ideas stand. But I guess the question is, like, where do you draw that line on engageability on who's a good faith actor and not? Because that's really where the question is. You don't talk to anyone.
I'm not a fan of the experts, to be honest. I'm a populist in that sense. But that's not to say I'm not a fan of experts. Like, I do go to experts when I want to find the truth. But as you say, the priority is the truth. Yeah. It's absolutely clear through the pandemic that the experts they didn't just let us down, they lied to us. It's the experts that have led us to the state of affairs, be they political experts, be they philosophical experts, whatever it is, and they fucked up. So when it comes to experts, it's not necessarily someone I go to. However, when it comes to, let's say, Churchill, I absolutely go to Andrew Roberts because it's phenomenal. His work is phenomenal. If you read his biography on Churchill, and is
there a Spark Notes for it, or
you'll want to savor every page, each of the
it's
900
not that. It's
pages.
when you give experts political power, that's really the problem. Somebody who's an expert, we spoke about this the other day, on a specific subject like epidemiology or even history. If you gave Andrew Roberts this ability now to impose of what you have to learn about subjects by law, that's a very different thing, and that's what the COVID
problem is that
was
we
too.
all have